Hey there, my name is Daniel, and in this video I'm going to be sharing downloads and insights I received about the Ascension process and the energetic roles of all of the starseeds and lightworkers. I received this information while on a pilgrimage to the very high frequency lands of Sacred Valley, Peru. This information brought a lot of comfort and clarity for myself in my own role during the Ascension process, and brought a lot of insights in terms of my own quirks and ways of being. So I hope this information does the same for you. But regardless, take what resonates and leave the rest, and let's get into it. Now, before I get into the downloads, I wanted to share just a little bit about the land itself that I visited on a pilgrimage, Sacred Valley, Peru. You're welcome to skip ahead by using the chapters and the timestamps below. But first, just want to talk a little bit about Sacred Valley, Peru, because I know at this time of this that I'm recording this video in March of 2025, a lot of the starseeds and lightworkers are being called to visit sacred sites spread around the world to receive activations, and that's exactly what happened to me when I went there. So it just felt like sharing a little bit of information about it in case it might trigger something for yourself if you want to go visit yourself. So Sacred Valley, if you're unfamiliar, is just north of Cusco in Peru, which that's where I flew into and arrived for my pilgrimage. And despite the density, it's still a fairly decent sized city. From what I researched, that the population is about 500,000. So it's in the human sense, in terms of the population density, you would think it's still kind of dense, but as soon as I arrived, I could tell that the frequency there was quite high. Group that I was with, there were about 15 of us on this pilgrimage who met up before our retreat, and all of us shared that we were experiencing very crazy, wild dreams. For example, myself, I experienced probably one of the craziest dreams I've ever experienced. I felt like I was in another dimension. My body literally dissolved and my consciousness flew into a wormhole, and I felt like I was flying, and it was awesome and scary at the same time. But that was just an example that clearly the frequency was impacting all of our dreams. It felt like I was in a similar site such as Sedona or Bali, which is known for being sites for an energy vortex. I had a similar vibe while I was in Sacred Valley. The frequency just felt really high. It was really challenging to sleep, but what I felt was different from, at least in my own experience traveling to Sedona and Bali, I felt supported by the energy and I didn't feel tired. Whereas in Sedona, I woke up in the middle of the night just drenched in sweat, purging, and was exhausted. Same when I was in Bali. But in Sacred Valley, I felt the energy was quite supportive, and I was finding that I wasn't that tired while I was there. Another interesting tidbit I noticed is that when I was listening to music just through my headphones on Spotify, the music that I was listening to sounded slower compared to when I normally listen to it back home where I live in Florida at sea level. The way I interpreted that is the vibration must have been so high that listening to music just started sounding slower than it normally does. So that was an interesting tidbit I noticed. Also, I noticed that the veil between worlds is quite thin in that region. For example, when climbing a mountain on one of our pilgrimage days, I noticed a very clear black shadow just zoom across my peripheral vision, which I interpreted that as being an animal spirit that was present. There was a massive presence of spacecraft in the region. They were, of course, all cloaked as clouds, but to me and to a keen observer, it was very obvious and clear that there was a huge presence of spacecraft. Some of them clearly parked on top of some of these mountains, some of them looking almost exactly like what you would expect a spacecraft to look like in a Star Wars movie or something. So there were a lot of spacecraft present. On top of one of the mountains that we climbed, I felt the highest frequency I've ever felt in my entire life. It actually felt as if there might have even been an etheric, angelic city in the clouds there. It felt, the kind of an insight that I received was that this was as close as that frequency, a large presence of angelic beings could come in the physical realm. And they were there present in that environment because the frequency was so high and the altitude is also very high. So it was being there, it's kind of removed a bit from a lot of the density at lower altitudes. And then of course, I received a ton of intense activations, downloads. Sometimes I even felt like my third eye was being drilled on, being activated. Energy was being shot straight into my third eye. So just thought I would share some of these experiences that I had while I was there, in case anyone's has any thoughts of doing some spiritual tourism, and then just some of the normal things. The food there is great, the people are friendly, so if you're on the hunt for doing some spiritual tourism, I would highly recommend giving Sacred Valley, Peru a chance to visit yourself. So moving on to the main purpose of this video, the downloads that I received about our energetic roles for the starseeds and lightworkers. So I received many of these downloads during a Wachuma plant medicine ceremony while climbing a mountain in the valley. And if you're unfamiliar, Wachuma is also known as San Pedro. It is a cactus plant medicine that is indigenous to the region, which has been used ceremonially as well as for healing purposes for thousands of years by the native tribes in the region. It is very much a physical and emotional experience that often brings one deep into your body. It opens the heart and creates a very strong connection to nature. And what is common as well, especially in the second half of these ceremonies, is to receive a lot of insights and information and clear transmissions, which that's exactly what I received, and it is how I received the information that I'm about to share with you right now. So here is exactly how it went down, because the process of me receiving the downloads was actually part of the download itself. So here's how it went. After a few hours of our first ceremony, and we arrived at a very stunning peak atop one of the mountains there, overlooking the valley. There's just beautiful mountains as far as the eye could see, draped by gorgeous clouds. I began receiving a very intense activation for about an hour straight. And at this point, this is where I personally felt the highest frequency I'd ever experienced. It felt like my entire spirit team was around me. I could literally feel the presence of angelic beings. They were revealing themselves in the clouds. I could see dragons revealing themselves in the clouds, and then of course a parade of spaceships. And I could tell that my main purpose in going on this pilgrimage was to go up to that frequency, get that activation, and then bring it back down to the lower, more dense environment which I inhabit on a day-to-day basis. Now, while I was receiving this activation, it was very intense. It was incredibly uncomfortable, painful at times even. It was a real challenge for me to try to even just wrangle it into my body. I was squirming, squeaming, just like barely able to even kind of hold it together. Some of the people in my group could even notice that I was really struggling with a lot of energy, to the point where another man on my trip noticed that I was struggling with some energy here. He walked over to me, put his hand on my back, and he started chanting something, and that right there kind of calmed me down. And I had this thought, hey, this guy is really good at stabilizing energy. And that right there is what triggered all of the downloads and insights that I received for the remainder of my ceremony, for the next few hours, that we all, starseeds and lightworkers, have different roles in the ascension process and different ways of dealing with energy, which is what I'm about to share with you, all the various roles that I learned about. And at the end, I'll tie it all together with how all of these groups work together and they all fit into a very detailed master plan that comes straight from source. So while I was receiving this activation, I noticed that I was the only one in my group of about 15 people who was being noticeably activated. And I was wondering why that was. And it was through that process that I received a new level of clarity on my role. So my soul is angelic, meaning that it comes from the angelic realms. That is where my soul considers home. And the reason that I was receiving these very high vibrational energetic downloads and activations is perhaps they were coming directly from the angelic realms. As I mentioned, like I felt like there was perhaps an angelic city, etheric city up on top of that mountain. And I learned they come to me, someone like me first, because I am the closest match in terms of vibration here in the physical realm. So that's when I received the role of what I call the conduits, or the channels. There are a group of us starseeds here whose primary energetic role is to be a conduit for these higher dimensional energies and bring them through from the higher realms into the physical. These conduits are the first bridge point from these higher dimensional energies into the physical. And here, what I was getting, some feelings, some insights, and downloads are general characteristics of this group. So in order to meet this incoming energy, they must be the closest vibrational match to them. So they are likely the most awake and aware, the highest vibrating starseeds at any given time, which doesn't mean that they're better, it just is the nature of their role. They need to be vibrating as high as possible to meet this incoming energy. So they're likely the most sensitive, the most empathic, they're most likely to be organically drawn to a video like this one. On the flip side, they're least able to be grounded. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, as that's just not the purpose of their energetic role. And I noticed there was actually another man in my group who we had exchanged perspectives on our soul origins and roles, and I found out that he as well was of an angelic soul origin like myself, but I noticed that he was not being as impacted by the energies as I was. And we had conversed, and we had both shared that we were both receiving downloads and activations, but I was the one who was having this really intense physical experience where he seemed to be managing it quite fine. So this is where I received insights that not only are there these broad energetic categories, these roles, but there are potentially perhaps even an infinite number of unique ways of expressing each of these roles, which I'm going to share throughout this video. So for example, I got this vision that the way I'm expressing my role as a conduit was almost like Thor in the movie Avengers Infinity War, where to activate a machine to build himself a new hammer, he had to hold a machine together and take a full frontal blast of energy from a dwarf star. So the vision I was getting was that was kind of like what I was doing. I was just taking a full frontal intense blast, and I just had to sit there and receive it and try to wrangle it into my body. So I figured out that my role as a conduit is perhaps more feminine in nature, just a more chaotic, open, full receivership of energy. Whereas my friend, who was also an angelic, and I figured out that his role also is that of a conduit, he seemed more of a masculine conduit, in where he was able to kind of almost consciously bring in this energy in a very calm, focused, meditative state. So these roles seem to still be completely unique in the way that they're expressed through our unique soul essence. Then after this energy is brought through the conduits, especially in my case, the energy is just too chaotic. It's all over the place. And this is where the next group comes in. This group I call the stabilizers. This group is responsible for stabilizing the incoming energies to make them digestible for the earth souls that we are here to assist in this ascension process. So as I mentioned, one man in my group assisted me in stabilizing my activation, and he did so just by putting his hand on my back, getting in a meditative state, and chanting out some nice phrases. The vision I got for him was that he was like Kevin Bacon's character in the movie X-Men First Class. Unfortunately, he was the villain in this movie, but he had very profound abilities where he had the ability to sort of absorb and wrangle energy into his body, to where even if a missile exploded right in front of him, he could, with his hands, wrangle all of that energy together and absorb it into his body. So that seemed like one possible way of stabilizing the energy that is coming in to the planet for our ascension process. Then there was another time where I felt the energy in our group was getting really intense, like it was almost bubbling out of control, and I could feel my body starting to activate really intensely again. But there was one man in our group who told a perfectly timed joke.
Dance off, bro. Me and you. Come on. Subtle. Take it back.
And I felt the energy become deflated and more manageable as we laughed and we started to have this release, and all of a sudden the energy became more manageable. And then there was another man in our group who just had this really calm demeanor about himself. He didn't need to do anything. Just by being his calm, peaceful self was able, I sensed that he was able to stabilize the energy. Anywhere he walked, it would bring peace and calm and stability to the energy.
I've mastered the ability of standing so incredibly still that I've become invisible to the eye. Watch.
So I feel that there are a variety of ways this energy stabilization role is being expressed, and many times it's just through one's own natural traits and behaviors. I then received the next role, which I call the catalysts. This group has the important job of catalyzing and charging up the rest of us. They are likely to be in positions of leadership or influence. They remind us of the mission, why we're here, constantly encouraging us to stay on your mission. They bring us together, which gets us excited by being around like-minded people. That always gets people excited and gives a nice top up to your energy. You feel that you're not alone. And essentially, without this group, we'd all just get tired and run out of steam. So they essentially just charge up the rest of the light workers, which is a very important role. The final group that I received are what I call the anchors or distributors. This group has the incredibly important job of taking the energy stabilized by the stabilizers, anchoring it into their body, and distributing it distributing it en masse to the unawakened masses. These people are likely to be the most veiled. In general, they're probably the least awake mentally, least aware of what's happening in terms of like the ascension process and their role, what they're doing on an energetic level, and this is by design. They are most likely at this point to still be immersed in 3D environments and perhaps engaging in 3D behaviors as well. And I received that they are also it's more common for this group to even have a larger frame, a larger body, and that is intentional so that they can hold large amounts of energy in their body so that when they go around and engage with other people, they have a lot to hold on to distribute to other people. What I saw for this group is essentially that they're like Santa Claus. They're just holding a huge amount of energy and they're gifting it out to anyone who is in need of this high vibrational energy, passing out huge amounts of energy to the most dense humans among us. And once I got this last group, up until that point, it's just started seeming like just random information like, hey, this person is doing that, this is their gift, this is their ability that I understand this group. But once I got to this point, I realized what I was really receiving and what I was given, that this is actually fitting into a larger plan. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about that before I return and dive deep again into the anchors. But essentially what I received were the schematics of the ascension process. I essentially received God's plan. So what I was then seeing is that this whole operation of ascension was like a daisy chain. The energy to support Earth's ascension and for humanity is being sent directly from source. And then it moves from source into other higher planes of existence, for example, the angelic realms. And then it moves into the physical. It's brought forth by the role of the conduits. Then from the conduits, it's made digestible by the stabilizers. All of us are being charged up by the catalysts. The energy then reaches the anchors to distribute out en masse to all of humanity. So it's this one large daisy chain from source, angelic realms, into the physical and conduits, to the stabilizers, catalysts, then down to the anchors, spreading out en masse to the unawakened masses. Once I received this schematic plan, I began to realize that all of this was meticulously planned by all of the hosts of heaven and from source itself. And I got the message that God hadn't forgotten about a single soul here on earth, that everything had been planned out to a T. Any unawakened soul in this 3D matrix has someone amongst these lightworker roles to support them in the exact manner that they need. So this brings me back to the anchors. So as I said, many of them are still operating what we might describe as a lower frequency. They're engaging in 3D behaviors. Perhaps they might still have issues around substances or drugs, or maybe they're having frequent low quality casual relationships, things that we might judge as being, not very high vibrational, and we might lament the fact that we can tell maybe that they have a glimmer of light in them, that, they're still engaging in high vibrational activities. And that's another aspect of this group that's very valuable and very important. They have the unique ability of being in the higher vibrational frequencies, hanging around awake and aware souls like these conduits and stabilizers, and they can be in that frequency. But they also have the ability to be immersed in the dense 3D environment, whereas people like the conduits, they're so high vibrational that if they spend too much time in the 3D, which I'm sure you might know if you're listening to this, you will get drained. So we really need these anchors because they have this really important ability to be able to spend time, long periods of time, in these really dense environments. We might judge them for being in these environments, not knowing that that's actually their role. If we think about it, who needs the most help amongst humanity? Who are the types of people who are most separated from source, most trapped in this 3D matrix? We might think of someone like a drug addict. There are also some light workers who might still be engaging in some of these behaviors. And then the message I got was, well, how is God going to reach these people except by sending some of his strongest warriors to be right there next to them and engaging in their own behaviors? We might be thinking, like some people might be engaging in the low vibrational activities of having casual relationships. Well, how is God going to meet the people on the receiving end of that except by sending some of his most loving, compassionate souls to be right there with him and share their love and open their hearts and send that energy to them right next to them in person? This isn't necessarily an excuse to continue those behaviors, but what it is this is an explanation of why things have played out the way they have. That essentially it kind of needed to be this way. We needed to come in and engage in their behaviors. And then as we all raise our vibration and start making higher vibrational choices, we then help humanity through the ripples. They see us making better choices, which triggers them to do the same. So those higher up on this daisy chain pull up the lower rung, and so on and so forth. So when these anchors who are really immersed in these 3D environments, once they start making better choices, they're bringing up all of humanity with them, and so on and so forth, straight up the chain. So the point I want to make here is, if you've been hard on yourself for your natural tendencies or for not being able to kick a bad habit now or in the past, it's likely been part of the plan all along. It was likely there to regulate your vibration. If we all raised our vibration too fast, we would have left the rest of humanity behind and they wouldn't have anything to grab onto. So especially these anchors, if they were riding high at the level of the conduits all the time, it would leave a gap in this chain and the whole chain falls apart. So this whole chain falls apart if all of us are not exactly where we're supposed to be at, the exact vibration we're meant to hold in this daisy chain. Every single role is vitally, crucially important. So who you are and who you have been at every moment throughout your life likely has been exactly what was needed to keep that chain intact. So on behalf of Source and the hosts of heaven, thank you for being here, thank you for your service, and thank you for being you. So I will leave it at that. Those are the downloads that I wanted to share. I hope it provided you some clarity, some comfort that who you are is exactly perfect in the moment right now. Leave a comment if any of this resonated with you. If you feel like you aligned with one or more of these roles, I would love to hear it, or any sort of questions or comments. I would love to hear from you. Thanks so much, and I'll see you next time.